This episode of Bartholomew Town is brought to you by the University of Rhode Island Online, Newport Film, Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, and Health Source RI for employers.
Bartholomew Town.
Welcome into Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew, and guess what? We are definitely in political season, that's for sure. It's something that we've been beginning to highlight some of the candidates, at least in the governor's race and otherwise, and something that I think a lot of people are watching right now is the Attorney General's race here in Rhode Island. No doubt it's going to be interesting, and there's going to be a lot of, I think, focus points will be one of the major things that comes out of this race in terms of where the candidates first in the Democrat primary and then in the general want to put the bulk of their efforts with the resources available to the Attorney General's office in Rhode Island. I think he's one of the hot candidates right now, at least in terms of buzz. He's already recently just raised $210,000 in kind of a sweep, and that's Keith Hoffmann, who joins us today on Bartholomew Town. Keith is most recently, his role was a senior aide, chief of policy in the Rhode Island AG's office with Attorney General Peter Neronha. Keith, thanks so much for your time today.
Bill, thanks so much for having me.
What would you say, just right out of the gate, is what the motivating force that has made you decide to get into politics proper?
Well, you know, I grew up here in Rhode Island, and it was a time when public institutions like the EPA, like our public libraries. I used to go to the public library down the street with my brother and sister growing up, and we could really count on federal institutions like these to support our families and to help them thrive. And I always wanted to go into public service. My parents were both really committed to public service, and I went to college and law school and have really been doing public service work since that time. Including most for the last number of years in the Attorney General's office. And we're in this moment where two things are happening. The federal government is unlawfully, unconstitutionally, in many cases, trying to harm Rhode Islanders, harm these institutions that we've relied on for generations under presidents of both parties in the past. You know, just an example of environmental enforcement. Right? If we're going to see environmental enforcement of our, making sure that polluters are held accountable, it's not going to be from the EPA anymore because the president's administration has no interest in doing that. So we're seeing the federal government trying to take actions that will harm Rhode Islanders, trying to cut back on protections in healthcare, right? So this is both through things like cutting Medicaid funding, right? That's going to directly harm our hospitals, our healthcare system in the state that's already under crisis, and through things like, I believe, restricting in the future. They've taken steps to potentially restrict access to reproductive healthcare and other life-saving healthcare for Rhode Islanders. I think we need to be prepared to fight that aggressively, and I've been helping to lead that fight. I was helping to lead that fight from the Attorney General's office, and I would continue to do it if I'm elected Attorney General. But the other thing that they're doing is when they're pulling back on things like environmental protection or public safety through, asking our FBI and our other federal agents that are tasked with doing core federal law enforcement functions, when they're doing civil immigration enforcement, what isn't happening in Rhode Island? And what's not happening to the extent that it should be is gun running, is human trafficking enforcement against gun running, enforcement against human trafficking, enforcement against straw purchasing of firearms. The Attorney General's office in Rhode Island has a core public safety function, and we have to be prepared to stand up for victims, to make sure that Rhode Islanders are protected, and that if the federal government isn't prepared to fight for them, that we are out of the Attorney General's office. So that's why I decided to run and why I want to be the next Attorney General of Rhode Island.
It's interesting because right now there are just so many different lanes. And if you think about what our current Attorney General, Peter Neronha, has been involved in, a number of, and I mean literally numbers of lawsuits against the Trump administration. It just seems like it's an endless sea of different specific and general topics that are being eroded. And when I say topics, I mean, it's topical because you can look at it from a broad stroke standpoint. And you can even go all the way out and say, at some level, human rights are being constantly eroded here under this administration. Do you see it as something you would kind of jump into the continuation of the efforts that Attorney General Neronha has made in pursuing litigation against the Trump administration on a number of different fields. Do you see that as a tenet of what what you would be looking to do, the work you would be looking to do as AG?
Yeah, I do, Bill. So as the chief policy to Attorney General Neronha, it was kind of like 20% overseeing the legislative work of the office. And we had a wonderful legislative liaison and policy analyst who I worked with to do that. And it was probably 80% working on the big cases that we were working on in the office. So it was April of last year that Attorney General Neronha and I were talking about what would happen if there were a second Trump administration. And what we were seeing from, at that time, Project 2025 and the tweets from future administration officials was that if there was a second Trump administration, it could be devastating for Rhode Islanders. And so I was put in charge of planning the fight for if there was a second Trump administration, and there was somebody like me in each ultimately each Democratic Attorney General's office. Obviously, any Attorney General could have participated in this sort of planning, but it was only the Democratic Attorneys General who were so interested. And we would meet a few times a week. We'd draft memos. We'd draft complaints, because what we were seeing, as I said, was an administration, if it took office, if it took power, that could be really extreme in their actions. After the election, we all know what happened. The senior staff who'd been doing this planning and the attorneys general met in Philadelphia. And I, along with an attorney from New York, presented to all the attorneys general about how we would be able to stand up for our states if the sort of actions that we expected came about. And they did, right after Inauguration Day. Just as an example, they froze all federal funding to the state of Rhode Island, all Medicaid funding, all federal funding, just incredibly reckless, dangerous, and unconstitutional. And we filed a lawsuit in federal court here in Rhode Island. We stopped that illegal action. That injunction that we obtained from the federal court here has remained in place. And unfortunately, we've had to file a number of lawsuits to protect Rhode Islanders' core interests. Again, we don't do this simply because we disagree with the Trump administration on a policy issue. That is not what this is about. This is about core, as you said, Bill, core rights, sometimes human rights, sometimes constitutional rights, sometimes simply following the law, right? I mean, there are certain things the president has the ability to do when elected, and there are certain things that the Congress has the ability to do, like create a budget that the president's supposed to faithfully execute. And when the Trump administration fails to do that, we have to hold them accountable and protect Rhode Islanders' core interests. That's what I would commit to doing if I'm elected Attorney General.
Yeah, there's no doubt that states' attorneys general are one of the front lines right now in resisting, I think that's the correct word, some of the capriciousness of the Trump administration, and that which is at minimum gray area, if not outright outside of the lines of not only the law, but kind of just the general intent of the Constitution. So it is which is obviously designed by law, but it's a crazy moment. I mean, yesterday I was watching a press conference with the president and Kash Patel, FBI director, and an hour and 4 minutes of just total chaos. And you really wonder, again, it's not really a Republican Democrat thing. It's what's the future of this country intended to be? And it does seem like one of the primary areas where this is going to be decided is obviously in the court system through states' attorneys general. So you're committed to continuing the work that the current attorney general here in Rhode Island, Peter Neronha, has introduced.
I am. And I agree with you, Bill. Some of the actions out of this administration are absolutely astoundingly reckless, dangerous, unlawful. The targeting of political opponents, the attacks against free speech, the attacks against Americans' core rights and values. It's very alarming. Look, I have two kids. They're 5 and 2. And for a while, as I considered whether to run for attorney general, the fact that I had young kids was a reason that I said to myself, look, I don't know if I can do it, if this is the right time for me. And ultimately, my kids were a big part of the reason that I decided to run after talking with my wife and my mom, who lives down the street and helps out with the kids around bedtime and bath time every night. And they encouraged me to run along with Attorney General Neronha, because at the end of the day, what kind of country are they going to grow up in? What kind of state are they going to grow up in? And when you see something like this that's happening, what do you have to do as a parent? And I honestly believe that the right thing to do is to show.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,200 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our more than 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health and dental insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.